Good morning. I would like to welcome you to the Agape Christian Church of Lansing, Michigan, where our pastor is Suffragan Bishop R.T. Embry. I am your teacher this morning, Deacon John Strudwick. Our Sunday school lesson subject this morning is a justice-loving God. Our lesson is taken from Isaiah, the 61st chapter, verses 8 through 10 through 11, and the second chapter, verses 2 through 4. Our key verse in this lesson is, "For the Lord I love judgment. I hate robbery, for burnt offering, and I will direct thy work in truth, and I will make an everlasting covenant with them." Now, we had a lesson a short time ago. It was from Amos, where the Lord said, "I hate your feast days. I don't want to smell your solemn assemblies." God himself ordained these feasts, but the manner in which they were conducted is what he disdained. They were just going through the motion. The scripture tells us, when you come to God, present him with clean hands and a pure heart. That's what he's looking for. And the Jews in that time, they were not sincere in their heart. And when the Lord say, "I love justice," and God is a lover of justice, that's what he is. And that's what he expects of us, to love justice. Now, when we think of justice or judgment, the scripture says judgment. That's the term is used, judgment. Judgment and justice is very similar. In our society, when we say judgment, we have this, we convey a sense of condemnation. But justice also means, judgment also means justice. If you take, for example, if you sue someone in court and the judge, when the judge renders a verdict, it's called a judgment. He will say judgment for the plaintiff, a judgment for the defendant. In essence, what he is doing is trying to right an injustice. For example, if you buy a product, that product turns out to be defective, the merchant or the manufacturer does not want to honor your request to get your money back, you say, "Well, I'm going to sue you." Because in the eyes of the law, in the eyes of justice, it's not fair for the merchant or the manufacturer to keep your product, keep your money, and sell you a defective product. In an effort to make you whole, to compensate you. In other words, judgment for the plaintiff means that we're going to set this record straight. We're going to make you whole again. So the idea of judgment has a sense of justice, fairness, and equity. And that is what God is. And that's what God expects us to be, is to show mercy, show justice. And in our lesson, we have, let me give you a little bit of a background. And this part of Isaiah, the Isaiah is broken up into two major divisions. The first covers the first about 40 or so chapters, and from chapter 40 to the end of Isaiah really deals with restoration, the restoration and rebuilding of a nation. Now, at this time in Israel or Judah's history, they had just came out of captivity and Babylonian captivity, which lasted some 70 years. And as a result of the decree that was signed by this Persian king, allowing Israel to go back to their homeland in Jerusalem. Now, many of them went back, a few did not go back, but many of them went back to Jerusalem. However, when they got back to Jerusalem, they found the city in ruins. The city was destroyed. Now, they were already in captivity for some 70 years, and at one point during their captivity, they had accused God of abandoning them. But we know that was not the case, as we're gonna see as the lesson's gonna unfold. It lets us know. But because of the fact that they had spent so long in captivity, they thought, Lord, you have abandoned us. And even after they had been released from captivity, when they got back to Jerusalem, all they saw was destruction. And just as it is today, when we go through difficult circumstances, when we face difficult circumstances, our faith can be tried. Just like when the Jews were released from captivity in Egypt. They got out in the wilderness. They got out in the desert, the wilderness. And they began to complain. They said, we were doing better off back in Egypt, which they weren't, but that's what they said. But many of them lost faith. And they give up. There's a scripture said that you don't give up. You don't think. Don't throw in the towel. When things are difficult, when the circumstances are not going great, this is not a time that you abandon your faith. And as going forward for Israel, we have the fact that they have gotten back to Jerusalem and things were not going well. The rebuilding of the temple at Jerusalem was not going well at all. So their faith was tried. And remember, in the Old Testament, God told Israel, I will not abandon you. I will not leave you. In the New Testament, he tells us, I will not leave you. I will not forsake you. So we don't have a reason to abandon our faith. However, when things are difficult, it does try our faith. But we need to hold on, because the promises of God are sure. God will keep his promise. And in our lesson, we have two outlines. The first outline is the priestly nation, and that is Isaiah 6, 8 through 11. And where he says, the Lord loves judgment. He hates robbery. So now the priestly Israel, the priestly nation is talking about here is Israel. Israel. Salvation is of the Jews first. Now, Israel was God's chosen people to be an example to the nations. Now, it was not the fact that salvation was for Israel only, although they had this notion, there was this notion that salvation is of the Jews. Even in the New Testament, the disciples, one namely Peter, had a problem with the Gentiles until God had to get him straight. So salvation, the priestly nation was to be our example, just as the church is to be our example today. Now, I don't want to jump to the second outline, but the second outline says a righteous nation, and that's talking about the restored Israel. But the idea is that the priestly nation was Israel, and Israel was to be an example for the world, and they could look to Israel, and many did, in both a positive and negative way. Let's say, for example, during the time that they were in captivity for the 70 years, and let's take that example. As Israel themselves said around the 40th chapter in Isaiah, that you've abandoned us. Maybe they had been down there about 50 years. Now, 50 years is a long time. And the nations would say, well, hey, yeah, where's your God now? He's forgotten you. And they look at it and say, no, maybe he has. But we know that they came out. They came out. So God kept his promises. And this is the thing that we can look to. Yes, things are difficult right now. And the situation that we are facing as we speak, yes, the situation doesn't look too good. But we know that God is still in control. And maybe some people say, well, where's God now? Why is he not doing anything about the situation? But this is not a time, just like it wasn't a time for Israel to abandon their faith, to give up on their faith. Yes, our faith is tested, is tried. Our faith may be shaken, but we should not give up on God. And some people have a saying that don't give up on God because he will not give up on us. Now, let's look deeper into this the first outline. And around verse 10, it makes reference here to the garment of salvation. He is covered up with the garment of salvation, and he is covered up with us with the robe of righteousness. Now, just to be clear, those two are the same thing. Now, and a little bit about righteousness. When we talking about righteousness, we are talking about his righteousness. He has clothed us with his righteousness. We'll talk a little bit later about righteousness. And the garment of salvation. Salvation, we also know that it's something that you earn, that you can't earn. Let me be clear. You cannot earn salvation. Salvation is not something that you earn, lest any person will boast. Yeah, I earned it. No, you didn't earn it. Salvation is a gift, a free gift. And one thing we know about a gift, you don't pay value for a gift. If you have to pay value for it, it's not a gift. So you don't pay value for salvation. It's not a gift. So it's not something that you can earn. And verse 11 said, "For the Lord God will cause righteousness and praise to spring forth before all nations." Now, this priestly nation, as I said, is talking about Israel. Israel was to be the example for the nations, or in other words, the whole world. That's the position of Israel. The scripture said to the Jews first, not to the Jews only, to the Jews first. Salvation, as it relates to the nation or the Gentiles, was not an afterthought, however. I want you to get that also clear, that salvation was not an afterthought. It wasn't like, well, I completely forgot about the Gentiles. I didn't think of the Gentiles. Now I have to make a way for the Gentiles to receive salvation. No, that's not the case. That's not the case. We was always in the plan of God as it relates to salvation. And it's just that the Jews were to be an example to the world. And in some instances, many instances, they fail. They fail, but ultimately salvation was made available. And this is what this chapter is talking about, especially the very first verses of the 61st chapter, which is not in our lesson. We started at verse 8, but if we go back to the very first verses, and where Jesus is speaking, he's basically getting ready to introduce salvation to the entire world as it was planned, not an afterthought, as it was planned from the very foundation, or before the foundation of the world. We was in the plan of God. We was in his plan, not an afterthought. Now, when we go into our second outline, the righteous nation, that's Isaiah 62, starting at verse 2 and going to verse 4. Now, the righteous nation, this speaks more of the restored Israel. This lesson is also about restoration and hope. Restoration and hope. So this, starting at verse 2, this is about the restored Israel. And we see speaking here, the nations will see your righteousness. The nations, the world, the Gentiles will see your righteousness. As I said, I was gonna revisit righteousness, your righteousness. Now, let's be clear. He's not talking about your personal righteousness, because the scripture tells us that our personal righteousness is as filthy rags that stinks in his nostrils. So it's not our personal righteousness. This, your righteousness in this instance, is referring to the imputed righteousness of Jesus Christ. That's the righteousness it's talking about. This imputed righteousness. The righteousness that we have is not of our own. Whatever we do is not of our own. It's because we have the imputed righteousness of Christ. So the righteous nation is that restored Israel. Now, also, the righteous nation is also referred to as the church, the Christians. We are that righteous nation. And as a righteous nation, is talked about dress codes in here, and dress and mannerism. We should conduct ourselves accordingly. And that relates back to justice, mercy. We should behave justly, even in an unjust society. That's what is expected of us. God is just. So he expects us to be likewise. And that's what is expected of us. And we should do that. Now, the righteous nation today, when we're talking about the church, speaks to both Jews and Gentiles. Because the church today is made up of Jews and Gentiles. And in the Old Testament, the Jews would say, yeah, we be Abraham's seed. We be Abraham's seed. Now, we could also make that claim today. We are the seed of Abraham by faith. Although they be the natural seed of Abraham, but as it relates to salvation, that does not benefit them. Yeah, sure, they're the natural seed, but salvation is available to everyone. The scripture tells us, for whosoever will, let them come. God is of no respecter of person. Just because they are the seed of Abraham doesn't give them any advantage when it comes to salvation. It really doesn't give them any advantage when it comes to righteousness. And well, Jesus spoke about that many times. He said, your righteousness got to exceed that of the scribes and the Pharisees. But their righteousness was based on personal righteousness anyway. Their righteousness was based on personal rights. It wasn't based on the imputed righteousness of Christ. So the righteous nation here more specifically refers to the restored Israel, where the nations will see your righteousness, meaning the imputed righteousness of God. And where the nation will see me blessing you, just as the nation or the world can see the church. He said, well, where's your God now? But we know that he has not abandoned us, because he has made a promise to us just like he made to Israel. And he was true to his promise. I remember the scripture was talking about when Judah was taken captive in Babylon. And there were some false prophets who said, well, yeah, you're only going to be down there a few years. You're not going to be down there that long. But the prophecy had already been spoken. You're going to be down there for a long time. But you're going to come out. And this is what we have to remember when we are faced with difficult circumstances. We have to remember God's promises. Scripture tells us God is the same yesterday, today, and forever. He changes not. Just like he did it for them in the Old Testament, just like he did it for them, he will do it for you. But you have to remember his promise that he made to you, and he will not break his promise. He will not. And this is what you can be assured, and this is what is being referenced here in the restored Israel, the righteous nation. The Lord will hold you in his hand, a splendid crown in the hand of God. Never will you begin called forsaken city. He didn't abandon them. It was a long time. 70 years is a pretty long time. But he didn't abandon them. He brought them out. When they came out, like I said, things weren't as they wanted to be, but God would, they was able to restore Jerusalem. The beauty and splendor wasn't there as it was in the first, but there was restoration. So as I said earlier, this lesson is also about restoration and hope. There was hope for them, just like it is hope for us today, because God is the same. He don't change. And as it relates to the righteous nation, we are the light of the world. Some people say, well, I want God to tell me this or that. It's not going to happen. We, the righteous nation, the church, are the one that is going to have to spread the gospel. And we can look back in history. This is like a history lesson for us. For as last week's lesson was when he was talking to Esther, and Mordecai told Esther, "Who knows whether you was brought to the king or put in this position for such a time as this." And this lesson can be a benefit to us today as we're going through difficult situations, that the Lord will keep his promises. The Lord is still in control. He's still in control. I mean, they may be chaotic. Things change uh, from day to day, maybe hour to hour. You may hear what did this in the morning. The news said, "Well, we're going to do this." Okay, in the evening, well, we got to do something else. But God is still in control, and He will bring us out, and we can look to the past to verify that God is in control. God sees, God hears, God knows. And he will uh, he will provide. And we like to thank you for watching us today for our Sunday School review. And we ask you to tune in next week for another edition of the Sunday School review. Thank you for watching.